Oi, oi, it's your boy, the Paul's Boutique of MMA cheek, Jack Slack. It's the Jack Slack podcast, and we're coming at you on Monday, the 16th of January. And we've got heaps to talk about today. We're going to start with UFC Strickland versus Imavov. We're going to move on to Superbon versus Allazov. And then I've got a question about Francis Ngannou. Something very interesting happened with him in the week. He became the first UFC champion, reigning UFC champion, to leave the UFC since BJ Penn back in 2000 and I want to say like 4 maybe. But yeah, tons going on. Highly recommend you check out the one event. Actually, I said on the last on the Boycast, sorry, if you're poor, you missed it. But I'll open this statement up to the plebs now. I was feeling the end of last year. I wanted to make an effort to cover more alternatives to not alternatives to the UFC. No, I'm going to watch it all anyway. But I wanted to make an effort to cover more widely combat sports. Kickboxing, boxing, other MMA organizations within reason. I'm not going to be fucking covering LFA or whatever. But I wanted to do that anyway. And then the UFC's recent run of sort of phoning it in with events has really made me feel good about the decision to start branching out more. I used to cover a bit more back in the day. I just got away from it because we got a UFC every single week. But one had a really strong event coming on this week because they had Allazov versus Superbon. Two of the pound-for-pound top 10 guys in the world in kickboxing and the two top guys in their division, which is a very strong division. But we'll get into that second, so feel free to go catch up on that. But Sean Strickland versus Imavov was the UFC event, or the UFC main event. Some interesting stuff on this card. The main event, you knew I wasn't going to enjoy it. I mean, I wasn't super psyched when it was Imavov versus Gastelum, but Gastelum managed to drop out due to mouth injury. Lots of jokes been made about what he was eating to sustain a mouth injury, because he's had issues with coming in on weight and his cardio in the past. But Sean Strickland stepped in at short notice, having fought 3 weeks ago. He ended the event. He ended the year last year, and he started the year this year. He was headliner for both. Good for him. Not good for people who watch the sport. He's not got a very fun style. And also, if you're headlining with the middleweight division is not very strong or interesting. But yeah, this was Imavov's chance to prove that he's like an upcoming talent and worthy of being rocketed into the top 10 or whatever. And for Sean Strickland, this was a chance to get back in the win column because he had a close fight with Cannonier, which a lot of people felt that he should have won. Lost it on the scorecards. Wasn't hurt enough in that fight to not come back 3 weeks later. So yeah, the fight was the usual Strickland fare and the usual Imavov fare, which is why it went so well for Strickland in a lot of points. But with a few more right hands and a lot more weaving into left hooks, which we'll get into in a second. Imavov, I think the Heavy Hands boys said it best when they said that he's a guy who has great distancing, so you think that he must be a master of striking. And then as soon as the opponent gets close enough to hit him and he hasn't got out of the way with his footwork, everything else about his defense is terrible. It just sort of panics. And there was a lot of that in this fight. There was a lot of him being drawn into the classic Diaz gambit, which is that the guy gets hit in the head a lot, so you think you're going to knock him out. So you start loading up on big swings, and he's still landing his many, many punches that aren't as hard. And you sort of ignore the fact that his body's there for hitting and would take a better toll on him over the long term. You ignore his legs. Both these guys took a lot of kicks to the legs, but didn't throw a lot of kicks to the legs. As a percentage of kicks to the legs, they took a lot. But it all got focused on the head hunting, and that's a Strickland-type fight. What does Strickland do well? I think he shows a great place for the hand fighting in MMA. We criticise him for reaching for punches and things, but there were long periods in the fourth and fifth round where it looked like Robbie Lawler versus Johnny Hendricks 1 and 2. Not as interesting, obviously, but both of those fights had long periods where both men were slowing down and they were standing in front of each other and they were both putting both hands out and covering the opponent's hands. And, you'll see it all the time in Muay Thai and things, but it's still incredibly valuable in MMA, especially against guys who want to hit straight and clean. You just put your hands on their hands and it makes it very hard for them to do that. The other thing about Sean Strickland that really does bother people is the teep, the lead leg push kick. It is a fatiguing technique. We're going to talk about it a lot with Superbon later in this episode, but it's really interesting watching him do it in MMA because very few people use it like he does in MMA, just constantly getting up on one leg. And I think that's part of where the headhunting of his opponents really pays dividends for him, because he gets on his rear leg and teeps every second or third engagement. And I've never seen anyone try and knock it across him with their hands and enter on a takedown or get around behind him or step through and kick out his standing leg, cut kick him. A cut kick in MMA is a big deal. If you kick someone's standing leg out while they're on one leg, they're on their back and you can get on top of them. And Imavov was attempting takedowns, so he clearly wanted to get the fight to the floor, but he was missing the obvious opportunity for a much easier takedown than having to wrestle this dude. The addition that wasn't in a lot of Strickland's recent fights was the many throws of the overhand in the first couple of rounds, and he'd throw the overhand and then he'd go duck down to his left and come up to his right in a little U, what's called a weave, and throw the left hook, which is a classic technique, the weaving left hook. TJ Dillashaw knocked out Henan Brow with that in their second fight. Igor Vovchanchin made a career out of it. KJ Noons was very good at it. With all those people I've just named, it's one of my favourites, and seeing Strickland do it was nice. I think it's frustrating because there's two elements of Strickland that are frustrating to watch. The first is that some of the stuff that he does should be... It's more frustrating that his opponents aren't doing smarter things against him. You got a guy who's standing there reaching for you and leaning back. Why are you not double jabbing? Why are you not throwing anything beyond a 1-2? You're just throwing one and then swinging a big 2 behind it, or a big overhand. Why are you not attacking the body? Why are you not attacking the legs? Why are you not cut kicking him when he's getting up on one leg? Why are you not getting him on one leg and trying to knock it offline with your hands and step around him? That's the frustrating part, that end. And then there's also the frustrating part that he doesn't really do a lot of damage. He had a couple of good connections against Cannonier. He did wobble Cannonier. He had a couple of good connections here against Imavov. This is the thing, he hits people enough that they do worry about getting hit, which is why his style continues working. But in terms of pursuing finishes, he's not very good at that. He's sort of a pressure fighter without the pressure ever accumulating into anything. A Diaz without bodywork. So that's why it's frustrating to watch, and it's made more tedious by the fact that every time he gets on the microphone, he has to be oh so random and oh so crazy, because people are picking up that his fights aren't all that interesting to watch, to be honest. If they put him in another main event, I'll just cover whatever else is interesting going on that week. I can't see him giving people like Robert Whittaker trouble. Could see him giving trouble to someone like Marvin Vettori, who is not very smart and doesn't game plan very well and doesn't adapt very well in fights. So that would be an intriguing matchup. If you put him against Costa, oh no, we lost Costa now, haven't we? But Costa would be a fun one because you've got a guy who religiously goes to the body. A big dumb meathead, but hits part of what he already does. Matches up well with Strickland's game. And for Imavov, there's stuff that needs working on. I think had he gone to his wrestling more and earlier, he could have had some more success. There was only one successful takedown in this fight, and it was Strickland in the third, I think. And it was, Imavov immediately bounced up from it. But both of them were entering clinches and threatening takedowns, which I thought was useful from Strickland. He was ducking under Imavov's right hands and coming up, threatening the takedown, or coming up punching, which works wonderfully too. So on to the good stuff from this card. Your co-main was Dan Ige versus Damon Jackson. Finally, Dan Ige puts it together for a spectacular victory. He's on a really weird run because he tends to fight in a really daft way. This is the man who fought Edson Barboza and attacked him and then circled off to let Edson Barboza back out to the center of the cage. He also had really weird game plans against Calvin Kattar and Chan Sung Jung. But he is a super explosive guy. He's a good wrestler. He hits off both sides. He's a good switch hitter. But he tends to do things on his whims. What I really liked from the get-go was that Damon Jackson's a big, tall guy with nice front kicks up the middle and long round kicks and long punches. And he likes to make a scrap of it. And what Dan Ige came out and did was he jabbed and immediately moved his head to the center slipped to his left, put his head right down the center of Damon Jackson's chest, and grabbed a collar tie as he moved in. If you watch people trying to get collar ties in MMA, a lot of them do it by like reaching out to try and grab the guy. And I think there's only really two good ways to get a collar tie from a striking perspective. Well, there's a few, but from a striking perspective, you either want the opponent coming at you, and you either shield with your a high forearm or whatever, or you leverage guard by putting your arm straight over, or long guard sometimes it's called in Muay Thai. You put your arm out over the top of their arm so that their bicep hits like your forearm and elbow, deflecting some of the punch, and your shoulders high, so that deflects some of the punch. And you can also turn with the punch, but then you pull them in. So you extend your arms to block punches, and then you pull them in from their forward motion. But if you're going forward trying to collar tie someone, I like punching, slipping, and putting your head right into them and just reaching out slightly in front of your head and grab and hold. So whereas if you reach out for a collar tie, you then bring your head to them. You have to move in after the collar tie. You have to bring yourself onto what you reach to. He was punching in and slipping and then just reaching out slightly in front of his own head. It was like he was trying to headbutt Jackson in the pec, which I really liked. Kind of links in with what we were talking about on the But Why podcast last time. We talked about Sylvester Miller last year. He was trying to headbutt Jack Cartwright in Cage Warriors. His ground and pound was naff. So what he did was he'd post up and he'd drop an elbow, but he'd do it with his whole body. And the elbow would go into Cartwright's pec. So it was never going to hit. But his head would smash down on top of Cartwright's face. But he did get caught and disqualified for it, which is why we gave him 2021's But Why award for piss poor fight IQ. But in this fight, Ige was jabbing or throwing the right hand and coming in head into Jackson's pec and then grabbing the collar tie. And if you watched it, he dropped him, I think, or he knocked him over basically, off a right uppercut and a right hook over the top from a left collar tie in the early going of this fight, like a minute in, maybe less. And he kept doing it. He kept entering, grabbing the collar tie with his left hand, hammering him with right uppercuts and right hooks. And then he later in the fight, he came in and grabbed a right collar tie, which was really nice, and threw a left uppercut. I really like taking the collar tie with the rear hand when you're in your stance, and throwing lead hand uppercuts. That's something Sandy Sadler used to do. He beat up Willie Pep with that in their fight, one of their fights, the one that's on film. Probably beat him up with it in their other 3 fights too. But really liked that. I really liked how he was working towards the cage. He was still sort of like working him towards the cage, and then he'd hit him bang, 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 or he'd enter and throw some punches, and then he'd let Jackson circle off. Now, there is a time for doing that. I'm not going to say that's the wrong thing to do, because, I have a bias towards putting people under pressure when you're cutting the cage. Use that, corner them, hit them. Maybe let him circle off a bit, but keep him under pressure. In this one, he was sort of like letting him go, but you can get away with just walking after people. I mean, think of Floyd Mayweather versus Conor McGregor. By just walking after Conor McGregor, he wasn't cutting the ring on him, but Conor McGregor was having to do big turns to get off the ropes, big running out to the center of the ring again, and you could exhaust a guy doing that. I thought Jackson should have been looking for the uppercut earlier, and the knee. He did throw a couple of knees and miss him. The front kick was not so much a possibility because Ige was keeping quite good pressure on him and moving. That's a sort of the front kick works very well when you've got a guy very predictably walking forwards at a certain pace, or if you've got a guy sort of standing there in the middle of the ring. Think of Vitor Belfort versus either Anderson Silva or Lyoto Machida. Standing there for too long, you can sneak that front kick in just for free, basically. But I would have liked to see Damon Jackson use the uppercut more, because Ige was slipping to the center line and then trying to put his head into Jackson's chest. This is one of those occasions where I would have actually been fine with the rear hand uppercut as a lead. If you think, I've second mention of Willie Pep on. Actually, he's going to get a third later, but second mention of Willie Pep today. He did great work, dancing around the ring, letting people come towards him. And then he'd step in with a big right uppercut, and he'd take his head off to the left side as he did it. So he'd either then float round to his left, exit the exchange. It's one punch, but he's exiting the exchange to his left, behind his right shoulder, doing a sort of reverse shoulder roll as you circle off, or you throw the big right uppercut and then you duck down and weave out to your right. Because if you stood the guy up, he's not throwing an uppercut because you've just thrown an uppercut, probably, 99 times out of 100. So that would have been useful for him. The lead hand uppercut would have been a monster punch for him here. If you watch something like any of Roy Jones's fights, but Jack Dempsey versus Jack Sharkey. Dempsey keeps walking forward with his head down and trying to get in on the inside with Sharkey. And Sharkey steps back with his right foot into a long stance, like a sprinter stance. And then he just cracks him with this left uppercut as Dempsey steps onto him. Really good punch for people who are trying to put their head in your chest. Some elbows would have been nice. Anytime you're having trouble hitting someone or they're just taking the punches really well, elbows are always a great shout because one, they're walking onto a big shard of bone. Two, you might cut them. And if they can't see very well because blood's in their eyes, you've got a bit more chance of hitting them. But the counter left hook that finished this fight was gorgeous. Again, it was Jackson came in for a right hand and Ige changed level, punched him with a right straight to the body underneath Jackson's extended arm. Oh, he must have come in with a jab, but yeah, he punched him in the body as that was open, and he came up with a left hook. And it was just a punching combination that he was doing. I don't think he was looking for that one knockout shot, but hit him with a perfect left hook as Jackson's right hand was being thrown out, knocked him out. Beautiful stuff. Massive hitter, Dan Ige. It is the game plans that's been holding him back against elite competition. I think he's probably going to, if he fights guys who are a step down, he'll keep getting knockouts. If you're fighting the Josh Emmets and Evloevs of the world, you've got to work a bit harder. But Keita and Jung, he should have won. Like, no one should be losing to the Korean Zombie at this point. Especially not anyone as talented as Dan Ige in their prime. Roman Kopylov versus Punas Soriano. But this was fun. I'm coming around to Kopylov, man. We were talking about this on the boycast, like his hand speed. He's got that weird thing where he looks kind of slow, but it is also seems to be throwing his opponent off. He is too, it's his opponents are going back to the corner and thinking like, oh, he's got really fast hands. But when you're watching it, they just look smooth. It's not like they're super fast. Certainly his feints will help that. But this was a great outing for the body jab, which we've been talking about for years. But even people like Floyd Mayweather, Sugar Ray Robinson, they knew that poking people in the solar plexus is tiring. Look at Sean Strickland's teep to the midsection, poking people in the solar plexus, especially when they're trying to do something of their own, really gets on their nerves and wears them down. So the body jab was a great one in this one. The jab upstairs was working well. They're both southpaws. Puna really likes the overhand left. And when I say overhand, I mean he straightens his arm and swings it in parallel to the floor. It's not coming over the top. It's a big left swing. But this is an interesting thing about striking styles and how they match up, because Soriano has this one big weapon, the left swing, and I'm going to throw back to when I got that prediction right with Soriano Todorovic, because I so rarely predict how fights will play out, but it worked out perfectly. But Todorovic, I would say, is a better mechanical, technical striker than Soriano, but some of his tendencies played into Soriano's big strength. Todorovic was hitting him with nice combinations, and then he was standing there immediately afterwards, which is how you get cracked. The great thing about Kopylov in this one was that he was always aware of what was coming back. If you watched him throw the body jab, he throws the body jab, he's a southpaw, he throws the body jab by stepping in, hammers the body with the right hand, turns down behind his lead shoulder rolls, and glides back to his right side on a little V. So he makes a little V step. That was gorgeous. Every time he was coming out of exchanges, he was rolling down behind his lead shoulder or getting his right arm up. When Puna started getting too close to him, he put his double forearms up, and he basically, kind of like we were talking about with Dan Ige, but he just went elbow into Puna's pec. Because if you get your hands on your head and then you drive your elbow into the guy's pec, he's probably not going to hit you. You're getting inside the big swing, if he's swinging, that is. If he's throwing nice tight hooks, you might have to be a little bit cleverer, duck under things, but it's a really nice way to deal with big swingers. You just crowd him. I mean, think of Diaz versus McGregor 1. McGregor's swinging big blows at Diaz, and Diaz is going between leaning back and then crowding in and just hitting him with basically like a headbutt to the chest. You put your guard up and you just push into the guy. It makes it very hard for him to hit you if you go between leaning away and coming back in. Crowding and dropping away. Sorry, that's what I meant to say. And then the other really nice part of this one was both southpaws. We talk a lot about like the liver shot. Your liver, supposedly, not a doctor. Someone did teach me to do percussion to find the liver, though, at one point, an actual doctor. But your liver is supposedly hanging down on your right side, under your bottom rib, more prominently than it does on your left side. So there's always this thing with southpaws. Oh, his left kicks are going right into the liver. With orthodox fighters, what is called the open side, where your belly button points to in your stance, is to your right side. So anything coming in from that side is kicking into the open side. The closed side is where your back's facing, which is the left of your stance. And if you kick someone in the closed side, you tend to hit their back. You know, imagine like a pro wrestler taking a chair shot over the back, because that's where you got loads of muscle. So normally for a southpaw, their left kick is going into the open side. But if you're fighting another southpaw as a southpaw, your left kick is now going into their closed side. But what Kopylov did really nicely was he was kicking when Soriano was opening up. So Soriano threw punches, and then he'd throw a left kick with his rear leg straight into the ribs or the liver, and he'd catch him squaring up with his elbows away from his body. By throwing it as a counter, he was able to hurt him really badly. And that's eventually how he got him. He hit him with a couple that made him wince, but the last one in the second round put him out, basically, and he followed up with punches to finish. I tell you, Kopylov, he's dangerously close to becoming my boy. Actually, I think he is my boy. Yeah, he's my boy now. Soriano's sort of like, he came in as a rough prospect with a big left hand, and he hasn't really added much. He also gassed out almost immediately in this one. Alhassan is the guy who gasses out if the fight goes over 90 seconds, but he actually went into the second round and finished this time. Soriano took over. He was like, I'm taking that mantle. Give me that crown. I want to be the biggest gasser on the card. This was also a weird card because it had tons of diving for takedowns from miles out. Soriano's first takedown attempt, he dived across the ring. That guy who fought Basharat, diving on takedowns. Rebecki, diving on takedowns. Daniel Argueta, diving on takedowns. Really just bizarre how many people were just throwing themselves at their opponent's knees in this on this card. Pennington versus Vieira. I bet on it going the distance and I didn't watch it. That's how I feel about women's bantamweight. Nurmagomedov versus Rani Barcelos. Rough for Rani because he's now 1-3 in his last 4. But this was impressive. Nurmagomedov reminded me a lot of Usman, which is why I confused them. Firstly, everyone's rocking the same style over there. No one's bleaching their hair. No one's doing anything interesting. They just all have the same look. But both of them really like that lead leg push kick that's sort of a side kick. The sort of Samart teep, he was very good at it. And he was using lots of those. But he was also finding his jab quite well against Barcelos, which is really surprising. He looked massive next to Barcelos. But he was switch hitting really nicely. He was throwing lots of sort of throwaway kicks. One of the things that I like out of that camp, certainly Umar and Usman both, kicking confidently if you're a wrestler. Because you're confident that if he grabs your leg, you can fight off a single leg. But partly because most people don't want to wrestle you. I think that's a massive boon. Because if you are a good wrestler and you're throwing body kicks and the other guy is also confident, maybe he's not as good a wrestler as you, but he's going, okay, well, I've got an advantage because he's on one leg. They can start using that. But if people don't even want to wrestle you and you're throwing body kicks, you're doing great. The knockout punch was crazy because it was he went for a left knee, fell just short, and then just swung his left hand from like a 6-inch load up, but it just caught Barcelos out of position. I mean, it caught him on the side of the jaw because he was about to start swinging back, and his neck must have not been in a strong position because it just turned his head around. It happens. It's always been the case that you only need like 6 inches to land a good punch. If you hit the right spot and you have your body following through. I mean, but I don't even know if his body was following through all that much, but just hit him in the right place at the right time after completely missing at the wrong time on the previous technique. So I'm quite excited for him, and I also thought he was he came off well. Sometimes you can read people's personalities through their fights, but him and Barcelos clashed heads. Barcelos was actually attempting takedowns, which I thought was a really good idea. He showed the odd takedown attempt and clinched, ducked into clinches, but they clashed heads, and then Umar was furious momentarily, and then Barcelos immediately apologized, and he's like all the anger just disappeared from Nurmagomedov. They went back to sort of lightly sparring until the knockout. But then after the fight, he knocks him out, and then he hits him with a big hammer fist, and then realizes that the guy's head's just bounced off the mat. He was completely out. Because obviously, guys have got very quick reactions, but if you knock a guy down, most of these guys have had the experience of knocking a guy down and then not capitalizing quick enough. Because they want to be classy or whatever, or get the walk-off knockout. But This is a sport where people can recover very, very quickly. They only need a second, and then suddenly the ref tells you to go for it, and you're behind their legs and can't get to him. So he hit him with his hammer fist, and then he immediately went, "Oh no!" and like cradled his head, which I thought it really reflects well on you to do that in a split second. And I think he even apologized for the hammer fist after the fight. So yeah, I like him. As I said on Twitter, he seems like a cool guy from a camp of dorks. Yeah, no, I like him. He's good. I think I enjoy him more than Usman, but I think this is the thing. I think obviously different weight classes, but I think I enjoy Umar's weird striking more than Usman's weird striking. And I think Usman has also made a great decision by going to Bellator, where he's never going to have to fight anyone good. Well, until Mansour Banui rocks up. But, you know, he gets the same amount of praise for besting Patricky Pitbull, who's probably the worst lightweight champion Bellator's ever had. And Umar is getting like mid-card fights against Randy Barcelos, who's actually a very tricky fight, and you know you're not going to get nearly enough credit for beating him. Basharat versus Mendonca. Yeah, it was fun. I put up a clip of Basharat doing the pep step, which is where you are, say you're orthodox, you start side circling to your left. Say you're along the fence, you level your feet out and you start side skipping. And then you step in with a southpaw left straight as the opponent follows you around. Worked beautifully. Matthias Nicolau knocked a guy down in his last fight with that. Go check my Twitter for the clip. Or check the YouTube page for the Filthy Casuals Guide to Willie Pep and the Pep Step. There you go. That's the third promised mention of Willie Pep. Really like what Basharat was doing. He was showing fakes, and then he'd bounce in for like a shoulder fake at a jab. Mendonca would swing back, and then he'd lean back and catch him with a counterpunch. And then the next time they engaged, he just stepped in and hit him with a right straight on the face, which is what you got to do. Because if you show a guy a fake and then counter his reaction, he's not going to do that immediately again, because he's just been hit for it. And this is this is work with animals. You know, if something hurts when you do it, you're a bit more careful the next time you do it. But that's a great way to keep the feints working, is to immediately punish the guy if he doesn't react. The best fakers or feinters are also the guys who are fearless and step in to crack you for real if you show an instant of hesitation. Fight got a bit sloppy in the second and third. Got a bit grapply, and the wrestling wasn't all that great. But yeah, it was decent fun. I like Basharat. He looks good. And Mendonca, I think a lot of people had that sort of like, because he did the gun thing at the weigh-ins, the Kenny Omega point and your thumb is the hammer or whatever. I wasn't really bothered by that, but a lot of people took offense to that and were like, "Oh, murked." This is going to be one of those cocky MMA fighter gets comeuppance YouTube videos. But I thought he did fine. He was all right. Anything else worth commenting on? Abdulrazak Alhassan versus Claudio Ribeiro was bizarre. I must have seen Claudio Ribeiro before, but this was the first time I watched his entrance, where he has like a weird witch lady cry while she's talking to him, and some obnoxious dude going, "Hey, hey," over and over again. Yeah, by the time that was done, he took like 15 minutes walking to the ring. You're like, are you the Undertaker at WrestleMania? No, you're some mid-card jobber. Get in the ring and lose quickly, please. Abdulrazak Alhassan, I was so excited for him because, as I say, every time he fights, he either knocks the dude out in 90 seconds, gets face planted in 90 seconds, or gasses hilariously. This one, he got beat up through the early going. He was just taking these calf kicks and couldn't do anything about them. Clinched the guy, couldn't get a takedown, held him along the fence, finally worked out that he could crack him with an elbow from that position near the end of the round, then resumes holding. Round 2 starts, he comes out and just goes ham again. Like, immediately knocks him out. He does a post-fight speech. I mean, he seems like a nice guy. He did a post-fight interview where he's going like, my corner always telling me, you're a professional. You don't need to swing as hard as you can from the early going. Be a professional. So being a professional just means taking a round off and then going ham. He's a funny fucking dude. And to be honest, his last one against Buckley, was that his last one? Well, whichever one it was that went the distance, while they did both gas out, he was hitting like nice switches in scrambles and things. He's better technically than he seems like he should be based on his conditioning and the way he strikes. But his judo is always so highly touted and he never uses any of it. He gets the dude in the clinch along the fence and then can't do anything. So it's really weird. But yeah, it was fun enough. Rebecki, I can't remember how they say his name, but Rebecki versus Fiore. Man, I said this on Twitter at the time, but this is a hard way to earn 10 grand because both these guys just, well, firstly, Nick Fiore, it looked like he was going to take the beating through the first round and then start pouring it on because Rebecki was slowing down. But then it still ended up with him just taking the beating in the second and third too. Rebecki came out at 1,000,000 miles an hour in the first round, and he was the southpaw, Fiore was orthodox, and Fiore kept circling into the left round kick and the overhand and the wide left to the body, and Rebecki was just pounding him. But then he'd get the takedowns and he'd just sit in closed guard because Rebecki was super highly touted as a grappler based off his weird submission on the Contender Series. But if you remember the Contender Series, he fought Rodrigo Lidio, who was some Brazilian, but he was like a kickboxer who had X knockouts on his record. When you saw him on the ground, he was trash. I don't think I've seen anyone in a high-level promotion, because the Contender Series is basically the UFC, because they're just taking guys straight off that. Even if they lose, if they'll take a fight at short notice, they'll put them in the UFC. So you're at that level. But to be at that level and just like randomly turn into the guy and let him choke you while you're on your side, like all his reactions were that bad. I'm not just laughing about the last one, but he just looked like he had no idea what he was doing on the ground. So I didn't expect Rebecki to be like a grappling monster in this one. And when he did get on top, he just sort of sat on him. Fiore was absolutely fine. It was on the feet that Fiore was getting beaten up. My boy Alan Nascimento got an awesome submission over Carlos Hernandez. He should be 3-0 in the UFC now. His first one was a great fight against guy whose name I can never remember. Tagir Ulambekov, sorry. Well, he lost the split decision, but it was a really scrambly, grappling match. And it basically came down to the judges being like, Ulambekov was on top, defending submissions the entire time and throwing no strikes, whereas Nascimento was on bottom, throwing strikes and submission attempts, and they gave it to being a blanket. But he had a great performance against Jake Hadley. I did a post-fight article on that one because I really liked what he was doing. It wasn't so much his guard passing as how he was dealing with Hadley trying to stop his guard passing, landing these knees to the body, using that mounted crucifix from half guard that Team Quest used to use so much. But this one, yeah, he looked pretty messy on the feet. I was a bit like, oh, he might get himself knocked out here. His reactions just didn't look very good. And I've seen him look better on the feet. Sometimes you just see guys and their timing seems off that night. But he got him down, got on his back, put in the body triangle. But finishing from the back is pretty tricky anyway. It's not a great position to strike from unless you can get the guy belly down. And you've got big gloves. The guy did hold the gloves occasionally, and you will see guys doing that. But even if you don't hold the gloves, as in fingers in the gloves, you can still hold around the gloves. And that's a big, it's like trying to grapple with boxing gloves on. It's really hard to get your hands free. Whereas if you're no-gi grappling, your wrist just cuts through between their fingers like butter. You can just keep recycling these choke attempts. Whereas in whereas in gloves, it's a lot harder. So I was watching this and going, yeah, okay, well, 2 minutes left. He can just survive this. Don't really need to worry that much. But then Hernandez was doing fine. He was in a body triangle, but he was doing fine. And then he decided to walk up the fence and roll over onto his belly, which is not great to begin with. Because if you're in a body triangle and you go belly down and you get flattened, that's the worst position in MMA. That's the worst position in grappling. But he managed to not go flat. But to not go flat, he had to post his hands on the floor, and he slowly tried to get up to his feet with his hand on the floor. But the hand that was on the floor was the one that was supposed to be defending the choke. So Nascimento was just like, oh, okay, I'm having that. Grabbed the choke, hid his wrist behind the back with like the Dan Severn style rear naked choke grip rather than the full figure 4 rear naked choke grip. But yeah, this was just, Hernandez blew this for himself. I mean, it wasn't worst IQ moment of the year. Well, I mean, it's a young year, so it might be. But I don't think, it's not going into the Butt Y Awards, probably. But it was pretty baffling, because all you had to do was wait like 1 minute 30 in that position. And then you get a fresh start in the second round. But instead he did something wild and got choked. Daniel Argueta versus Nick Aguirre. I complain about people coming through the Contender Series not being good enough, but these guys came through LFA and they were still bad. Charles Johnson won in the first fight of the night, and he is actually surprisingly really good. And he came through LFA. But these two came from LFA, and they just look like they don't know what they're doing. Really strange stuff. Not going to talk too long about this fight, but I just, I tweeted immediately after it, not terrible, but I can't see either of these lads going very far unless they really change what they're doing. So that was the UFC. We're already at 40 minutes recording time, but I'm going to talk about One on Prime Video 6. What a catchy name. Superbon versus Allazov. I did an article about Chingiz Allazov earlier this week. I assumed that would mean he'd lose. But if you're a Patreon boy, I'll put the link in the description on YouTube, but go have a look at the Patreon to read that article. Just talking about Chingiz Allazov because he had a fight with Sitachai before this. He's a sort of offensive whirlwind, but he fought Sitachai in his last one. And when we're talking about game planning, I'm always more impressed when someone is denied what they usually do and they fight around it anyway. Chingiz Allazov fought a guy who wasn't going to let him tee off with 4 or 5 strikes at a time and do crazy shit, and he still managed to beat him in Sitachai. Fought Superbon, who I thought was an even better defensive technician, and he actually managed to get off the crazy shit. He managed to work in combination, crowd him, and it looked a lot like Superbon versus Murat Grigorian 1. Back in the day, Murat Grigorian came out, pushed Superbon to the ropes. Superbon was trying to like cleanly teep with his lead leg, standing on one leg, a la Sean Strickland, and he did it, and he got pushed too close to the ropes, and then he was standing on one leg with Murat Grigorian inside his hands, basically throwing overhands, and he got knocked out. The rematch happened in 2022. Superbon controlled the pace perfectly. Teeps, knees, round kicks, just kept him off balance, kept him moving, never got cornered by the fence, because we're in a cage now rather than a ring, because it's one. But, so I thought, ring generalship of Superbon, can't see him struggling too much with Chingiz Allazov's wild combination work. This might turn into a point fight, a very careful kick for kick exchange sort of fight out a distance. And Chingiz Allazov came out confidently and just battered him. Saw his, he did well in the first round, just sort of throwing bits and pieces. And then he saw his opening in the second, cornered him, hit him with the overhand along the fence, did it 2 more times to get 2 more knockdowns. And that was the end of it. But man, if you haven't seen that fight, go watch it, because Chingiz Allazov is on. Superbon was on one of the all-time great streaks already. He'd beaten Sitachai, Giorgio Petrosian, who, even if you know nothing about kickboxing, you've heard that name before, and Murat Grigorian back-to-back. That was one of the best 3-fight streaks ever in kickboxing, opposition-wise, and how he won. Chingiz Allazov is now starting a streak of his own because he beat Sami Sana in the first round by knockout, Joe Natawa in the first round by knockout. He decisioned Sitachai very convincingly, and then he knocked out Superbon in the second round. So he's on an incredible streak. But now he's going to fight either Giorgio Petrosian or Murat Grigorian, who are also really fucking amazing fighters. So everything in that division, they're calling it the featherweight division, but it's 155 pounds. Everything going on there, amazing fun. Keep an eye on it, fellas. But actually, while we're on the subject, I want to talk about One's presentation. Some of the things they do, I love. Like the big entrances, very cool. The hype videos, very cool. I thought the tributes, plural, to Victoria Lee were very tasteful. I talked about that on the Boycast, but, really tragic story. But they've made some really weird decisions recently. Another thing I love, they have the belt ringside and they have a spotlight on it through the fight, which might be really annoying for the fighters, I don't know, but it's very cool when you see it. But they are desperate to sell a push into America, and I don't know if they're going to be able to do it. They're $150 million in the hole. Basically, it's coming across as a scheme or a money pit. I was explaining to my wife this whole thing. What Chatri has done with One is that he's managed to make Muay Thai, which is not a sport with any money in it, commercially viable by making a Muay Thai company that he sells as an MMA company, but bundles as like a tech company. He's sort of like the Steve Jobs of MMA, but the MMA isn't MMA, it's Muay Thai. So they're desperate to convince people they're going to move into America. I don't know if they will, but they've got Demetrius Johnson, who was never a star for the UFC. I'm sorry, it's sad, but he never was. He's not a very charismatic man, and this, not being able to make DJ a star is the UFC's fault, because he's not a charismatic dude, but he's not a charismatic dude, and they decided to take Michael Chiavello, who's been one boy number one. He's been selling all their shit tier MMA fighters as world beaters back in 2005. Actually, I don't know when one started, 2010, but he's been selling their fairly mediocre Filipino guys who can't stop a takedown as possibly the best fighters in the world in MMA. Since that time, he's been doing that convincingly, or giving it his best shot. He's been their guy constantly. And then they cut him out of the booth without a word about it. They left Mitch Chilson. They added Rich Franklin and DJ, who both have zero charisma. Basically, one championship has become, if you are Matt Hume's mate, you get to be part of it. It's just, Rich Franklin is there because he's Matt Hume's mate. DJ is there because he's Matt Hume's fighter. Olivier Coste is their referee because he's Matt Hume's friend. People don't realize that Matt Hume is like their weights guy. They're always like, DJ has to fight giants who aren't weighed properly. Like, Matt Hume is his coach and also does the weighing. So they couldn't find an opponent to fight Stamp in time, Stamp Fairtex. So they took a photo of her doing like a stare down with Matt Hume at the weigh-ins. But yeah, truly baffling. They got DJ on commentary being boring and going, ooh. And then, as someone put it to me on Twitter, trying to vaguely recall what the one rules for Muay Thai are, or kickboxing are, midway through the fight. Sorry, Allazov versus Superbon was kickboxing. I've been saying Muay Thai because I love their 4-ounce Muay Thai. But yeah, very strange to have DJ, their commentator, and leave Chivello on the sidelines. And they did the same thing with Len Hart, who is Crazy Pride Lady, you'll know her as. She does the intros, or did the intros for Pride. I'm going to try one. Vandale Silva! Like that, yeah. But they replaced her with someone doing an impression of her and never said anything about it. It was really weird. Just because, like, they're a multi-billion-dollar company, if you believe their advertising material. They're throwing money at everything, but they will skimp 500 quid on Len Hart if they can. So strange. Anyway, the rest of these fights, not as interesting. Oh shit, I haven't watched Superlek yet. The Superlek Puertas fight was supposed to be a big deal. I'll watch that. I'll talk about it on the Boycast. But everything else was fine. Shoko Sato decisioned some guy on the prelims called Jaewon Kim, whose nickname was God of Fighting. And you're like, you're losing on the one prelims. Pick a different name. Gary Tonin was fighting a guy who lost to Ryan Hall in 50 seconds on The Ultimate Fighter by heel hook. So you knew what they wanted to happen there. But Johnny Nunes, he cornered him, got him to the clinch on the fence. And then Gary Tonin sort of gave up his back, grabbed the Kimura, and then dived onto his back to turn Johnny Nunes over with the Kimura, which was dope. I don't see it working on like elite cage wrestlers, but it was very cool. Turned him over with the Kimura, then submitted him with the Kimura. Stamp Fairtex fought Supergirl because she was supposed to fight Anissa Meksen in a mixed rules fight, which made no sense because both of them are kickboxers. Meksen might be more Muay Thai than kickboxing, but she won the glory. She won the glory title from Tiffany Van Soest, I think, at some point. But both kickboxers, they decided they were going to do a mixed rules fight. So 1 round kickboxing, 1 round MMA, 1 round kickboxing, 1 round MMA. Why? And then they tried to sell it by being like, actually, Meksen has 6 years of judo. That's what the one interns on Reddit were saying. And you're like, that's exactly what they said about Robin van Roosmalen and Rico Verhoeven, and both of them sucked in MMA as well. But luckily, Anissa Meksen couldn't make weight. I forgot to say, every time there's a one event coming up, the threads on Twitter of the weigh-ins are the funniest thing in the world, because they've been claiming to do this weight cut, this hydration testing for years. They weren't doing it, is what it seems to be, because the moment that they started doing events on American soil and they actually had to, had some scrutiny on them with this Amazon deal, everyone started failing. No one ever failed before, and now everyone's failing every time. The best ones are when guys, they're dehydrated and too heavy, and then they come back more hydrated but lighter. And you're like, what, did you burn fat in the space of an hour? So Stamp versus Supergirl was literally just them trading 1-2s for 3 rounds. Very rote, as Patrick Wyman would say. Rod Tang beat up Jidu Yibu, which was fun. I mean, he's Rod Tang. He does what he does. He walks forward, he beats people up. He gets kicked in the chin and then smacks his own chin and says more. I was trying to explain the Rod Tang thing to my wife. I was going, this guy, he's like 29 or 30 or something. He's had 300 fights. He gets kicked in the head in almost every single one, but he's like immortal. Ong Lashong was back. This is what was so funny. Earlier in the night, before DJ was in the booth, they showed him on the big screen and no one reacted. Then Ong Lashong came out and someone said that they treated him like he was a fucking beetle. They just love Ong Lashong. And Ong Lashong is, fairly mid, but he was fighting Gilberto Galvao, who's the roidiest man I've ever seen. Gilberto Galvao running in behind his head. He's bent over, looking at the floor, throwing punches. Onglashong counters him with a good uppercut. Galvao pushes him to the fence in an over-under. Starts trying to fence wrestle. Onglashong puts a forearm across his throat and starts circling out. And Galvao tries to push him back into the fence, runs his legs in, but leaves his head behind because Onglashong's framing on his face with the forearm. And he ends up just falling over backwards. It was so funny. I've never seen anyone do this. The guy's pushing my head away, so I'll get my hips in and fall over backwards. And Onglashong just got on top of him and pounded him out. Mikey Musumeci had a grappling match against some combat sambo champion. And what happens in these matches, they're not interested. The one grappling championship is not for grapplers. It's for an elite grappler to take on randomers from other combat sports. Every time they bring in someone from sambo, they don't do heel hooks in sambo competition. So they aren't up on the meta of heel hooks. And every time they just end up getting heel hooked by like Kader Ruotolo or Tyro Ruotolo or whoever. And Mikey was matched against this guy. The whole fight is just Mikey Musumeci cranking a heel hook on this dude refusing to tap. And, he got to the end. I don't know how he's being paid because they can't be being paid that much, but it's not worth blowing out your ACL for. Like, he's limping around after the match. He's posing with Mikey for photos, and as soon as Mikey moves away, he almost falls over because he was leaning on Mikey. It's just so crazy. He gets the moral victory because, of course, it's like he went the distance with a guy who's a much more elite grappler than him. But at some point, Craig Jones has said this, he wouldn't not tap to a heel hook unless it was the finals of the Worlds or the finals of ADCC. Because you're now going to lose 3 months of training, and that's going to put you back like half a year by the time you get back to full health and where you were. Just crazy. But that was a lot from one. I mean, really just watch it for Allazov versus Superbon. I've never seen a guy fight such tricky opponents and do it so excitingly. And I promised you a question about Francis Ngannou, so here we go. Dear Jack, did you hear Francis Ngannou is scared to fight John Jones? What a bitch, right? Should we call the winner of Gane versus Jones the UFC heavyweight champion, or do we have to keep using world champion? What are your thoughts? From your boy, Fiore. This was crazy. Francis Ngannou's been freed from his contract. It was very funny this week because this came out basically by an advert on the side of the stadium saying John Jones versus Cyril Gane for the heavyweight title at UFC 2, whatever it is. People immediately reacted by saying, oh, it must be a mistake. Because earlier that day, Dana White had tweeted out his usual watch the fights tonight with a video, Imavov versus Strickland. And at the end of the video, they had the poster for Imavov versus Cannonier. So everyone's phoning it in at the UFC right now. So everyone thought, oh, they just fucked it up. But as it turns out, they were just inept, and they did manage to announce it on the side of a stadium before they announced it. But this means Francis is out. Francis is gone. I believe that the talk is that his contract issues were more to do with wanting to box as well, which is kind of an interesting thing because he's always wanted to box. He turned up at the Fight Factory wanting to box, and Fernand, whatever his name is, said, why don't you try MMA? The standard's much lower. And after becoming world champion in that, he was like, I want to box, because he is legitimately a star, as big a star as the UFC can make you without being Conor McGregor or Ronda Rousey. That's how big he is. If you follow anything, if you step outside the world of MMA and then you see people trending on Twitter, it's him with Shaq. It's him lifting Shaq. It's him on Mike Tyson's podcast, It's those 4 slappers in the UK being like, who would you shag? And that girl going, Francis Ngannou. And all her friends are like, who the fuck is Francis Ngannou? That was hilarious because that went viral for a few days. But yeah, he's regularly going viral. He's doing everything you need to do to be a star, allegedly. If you sign to the UFC, you finish all your fights quickly, you should be well paid, you should be a star. And he was being paid 650 grand flat for the Gane fight, which is obviously insane when you compare it to the purses of heavyweight boxers. Now, he is not going to get far in heavyweight boxing, probably. But he could take a heavyweight boxing match and that amount of the purse will still be his. He can make more in a boxing match against a heavyweight boxer than he could in, 10 defenses of his UFC title. Now, the UFC said that they've offered him more than anyone they ever have as a heavyweight champion, but being able to do other things was part of the deal, or, was the deal breaker for him. I can understand both sides of that because as the UFC, I wouldn't want him doing other things. And as Ngannou, I wouldn't want to be stuck with the one revenue stream when I can work the Conor McGregor con. Do not forget that the ultimate end game in MMA is to con the public into watching a boxing match that you can't possibly win. That is how Conor McGregor made $500 million or whatever it was. That's what Kamaru Usman was desperate to do with Canelo. The exit plan for this game is to become the best fighter in the world and then do a sport that you're not very good at to trick people into paying tons of money for it. The crazy part is that this is a second or third time this has happened now. The UFC couldn't get Fedor on board, which again was to do with him wanting to cross-promote with whatever Vadim Finkelstein's promotion was called. Was that M1? You don't hear about Vadim Finkelstein anymore. That's what I'm saying. That was to do with cross-promotion and Fedor wanting to be a bigger part of it. Understandable on both ends, really. The other one was Overeem, when he was tearing things up as a heavyweight. He was outside the UFC as sort of maybe best heavyweight in the world while they had Brock Lesnar. And eventually, of course, they did get that together, and then Overeem beat Brock Lesnar and failed the drug test, but they weren't the best in the world at the time, or rather, it wasn't for the title. But yes, it's an interesting one because the heavyweight division, if you don't have the heavyweight champion of the world, it's hard to claim that you're the everyone good fights in the UFC. And for promotions outside the UFC, it's obviously a big feather in your cap if you have someone who could be the baddest man on the planet outright. Let's not forget the Strikeforce heavyweight tournament. A huge part of that was the intrigue of like any of these guys could win the UFC belt or whatever, or a few of these guys could win the UFC belt. So it puts us in a fascinating situation because I imagine Ngannou's going to do a boxing match against someone like Wilder, who's looking for a payday. Or, Tyson Fury loves a tune-up. And if this would be a tune-up for more money than he's ever earned. And he wouldn't have to fight Usyk. But if Ngannou does some MMA in the meantime, because he might try and do what Chris Cyborg was trying to do, or Clarissa Shields, and balance both. If he wants to do something in the meantime, Bellator heavyweight division, he walks through that because Bader and Fedor are fighting for the heavyweight title in a couple of weeks. The only man who gives him a challenge there is my boy Linton Vassell. Fucking love Linton Vassell. From Milton Keynes. Or Milton Keynes from Linton Vassell. You work out which one's the real one. If he goes PFL, who the fuck is their heavyweight champion? They got Verdum, but it's not him. Can't remember. If he goes KSW, my boy Alan Murphy, who does a lot of KSW's PR, I love him. But he was trying to make the case for Ngannou versus Phil Defree. I was like, I don't want to see Phil Defree die. I mean, if Fedor wins the belt, he's supposed to be retiring. But Ngannou killing Fedor probably does a lot of views, if I'm honest. You got the crossover between people who want to see Francis Ngannou best fighter in the world and the horny Pride Never Die boys who desperately want Fedor to be the best heavyweight in the world, something like 15 years removed from when he was. But in the meantime, we got Gane versus Jones in the UFC. Obviously, they're going to claim that he was like running from Jones or something. This is going to be weird because Gane had so much trouble with the not elite wrestling of Francis Ngannou. I mean, he is elite strong and he picked up some wrestling technique. But yeah, Gane had a lot of trouble with Francis Ngannou's wrestling when no one really thought it was going to be a factor in that fight. But John Jones has been getting into kickboxing matches with guys who he should be able to easily out-wrestle and losing those kickboxing matches in Thiago Santos and Dominic Reyes. So this is a weird one because it's really two guys whose strengths play into each other's hubris. Their strengths play into each other's weaknesses. But we'll talk tons about that fight closer to the time. Obviously, with John Jones, there's always the caveat, might or probably won't happen. Is 4 years of box squatting for sets of 2 the best base for heavyweight MMA? We'll soon find out. But man, I've talked for a long time today. I reckon that'll do us for today. Quick preview of what we're going to be talking about on the Boycast and what's going on this weekend. We got UFC Teixeira versus Hill, everything to do with that. We've also got one Lumpini, Ngannou versus Ramazanov. Jury's out on that one because that's a fun fight because Nongou's a monster. But Chatri hates Ngannou and has decided that that part of the card is Thailand exclusive and we get like the prelims. Like, why would I want to watch one prelims? We'll work it out. We'll work out a way of getting that. We've also got, for my boys who have a Beamer, the VPN crew, we're doing Crush, Osawa versus Satomi. I'll talk more about them in the week. I've watched a bit of Osawa, haven't watched a lot of Satomi. And we got KSW Materla versus Grove 2. That'll be fun as well. In the boxing world, we've got Chris Eubank versus Liam Smith. Could be fun. And Joseph Parker's back. I thought he was going to prison. So a good amount to talk about. If you want to get in on that, listen to the extra episodes, read the articles, support the podcast, sign up to the Patreon, become a Patreon boy. If you want to send an email to the podcast, and I am answering them now on the podcast, you heard me just now, send it to jackslackpodcast@gmail.com. And if you want to see what I'm writing at any time, fightprimer.com. I am your boy, Jack Slack. 3 more Sean Strickland main events this year. Bless.